Hey guys, welcome back to Clownfish TV. This is Kneon. We're going to talk about the comic book industry and some rumors that are floating around the comic book industry regarding someone we've had on this show. Actually, Art Thibert. We had him on a couple of weeks ago. Maybe it's been a couple of months. I don't know. Time flies. I think it's been about 6 weeks. We had Art on the show. Art is a veteran. Marvel and DC and other Image. He's worked for a lot of different publishers. Artist and inker. He's worked on some top shelf books. He seemed like a real nice guy. It was a pleasure to have him on the show. Very happy to have Art on the show. And there's a bit of a kerfuffle, I guess, brewing up over Art via Bleeding Cool. You know, Bleeding Cool. That site, yeah. So a bit of drama stirring up over at Bleeding Cool regarding Art Thibert. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in this video. If you guys have not subscribed yet, please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants. Occasionally, we do talk about comics. We do not talk about comic books as much as we used to, though, because there's a lot going on in pop culture right now. And, you know, frankly, you know, the comic book industry is in kind of a state. It's in kind of a state of decline right now. There have been a few bright spots, a few upticks in sales. Now, I did work as a comic book professional, trademark, TM, registration, mark, whatever, for a number of years, mostly on Disney books, primarily on Disney books for various publishers for about 15 years. And it's a tough way to make a living. It's very, very hard to make a living in comic books, even if you're working on top shelf books. The money does not flow like it used to back in the day because the money's not there. The books aren't selling. The companies that are producing the majority of content, Marvel and DC, you know, they're corporate owned. They're always looking to pinch some pennies. We're seeing the sales decline. We're seeing a lot of the indie publishers out there struggling to survive because the comic shops are closing up left and right. And it's not all doom and gloom. I mean, manga's doing well. Graphic novels seem to be doing well. And I guess the X-Men books over at Marvel are doing pretty well. But we don't really cover the blow-by-blow of the comic book industry because it seems like it's the interest in the comic book, the North American comic book market seems to be declining with the general public, which is very sad because I grew up wanting to be a comic book artist, you know, very badly, and finally had a chance to break in. And, you know, as I broke in, the industry was kind of on the downward spiral. But Art was there. Art was there during its peak years, you know, at least in recent memory. 80s, 90s, Art was working at Marvel. He was working on some of the best-selling books at the time. He was working on X-Men books and Spider-Man books and Inhumanoids, which I was pretty excited about because I love the Inhumanoids. So we had Art on. He's doing an Indiegogo campaign for Chrono Mechanics, which I think ends today or tomorrow. I'll put a link to that in the description. But that's not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is that Art has somehow, just by existing, apparently, come under fire from Bleeding Cool. Art opened up about why he's no longer working at Marvel Comics. He hasn't worked at Marvel. He hasn't worked at Marvel for a very long time. I didn't ask him when we had him on the show. I'll put a link to our interview with him. You know, it just happens. You know, a lot of these companies cycle through artists. Sometimes they're looking for certain styles. Sometimes they can't afford veteran artists anymore. It seems like more and more, especially at Marvel, they're really cutting back on expense, on talent compared to what it used to be back when the money was flowing a little freer than it is right now. But Art opened up about what happened, and there was, you know, a story he had about how he basically was blacklisted from Marvel because he wouldn't toe the line. There was something new they wanted to do regarding blue lines to ink on, and he wasn't really on board with this decision. It's a very complicated story. I'll put a link to his original video, and you can hear it from him. He can explain it, because most artists working in the industry now, unless they're you know, they're veterans, most creators now are working almost entirely digitally. So for some of you, it might be a totally alien concept to talk about having original artwork and having original inks and being able to resell those, which I completely understand. So I'm going to link to Art's video. He can explain. Anyway, he opened up about the story, why he was blacklisted. And I mean, these are events that happened like 15 plus years ago. You would think it'd be water under the bridge, but he's talking about why he doesn't work at Marvel anymore. He was pretty angry at the time, but he's excited about his YouTube channel and his Indiegogo. And here comes Bleeding Cool. So here comes Bleeding Cool. Bleeding Cool, who has a raging hate on for any comic book creators who identify as Comicsgate. Personally, I think that's what's behind this, because I don't see any other reason why it would necessarily be newsworthy, right? I mean, there's a lot of more newsworthy stuff that's come out that Bleeding Cool hasn't covered, but they decided to go, go dig up Art Thibert's video and talk about it and name drop all these people. And supposedly they had insiders. They had insiders at Marvel and or DC who told them that Art was poaching talent. When he was at Marvel, he was taking lunches and poaching talent from Marvel to send them over to DC. And this is actually coming from Bleeding Cool, but there are no sources to back it up. Now, I understand keeping your sources close to the vest. We have, and I'll be honest, we have animation industry people who come to us. We have Hollywood people that come to us. I don't disclose who they are. So I completely understand not being able to out your sources, but this is a pretty serious allegation against Art, because you basically have taken one of the most read, as far as I can tell, one of the most read comic book blogs have come out and accused Art of, and DC Comics have accused DC Comics and Art Thibert of paying people to jump ship from Marvel to DC, because he took a lunch, I guess, at a convention with some DC people while he was freelancing for Marvel. And the thing is, though, is that's completely normal. That's actually completely normal. And I want to talk about that. That's mostly what I want to talk about. And I'm going to elaborate. And I think Art has actually done a follow-up video where he's elaborated a little more, because unless you've worked as a comic book freelancer, it's a very different world. You're not working for the comic book factory and punching a clock and doing your 9 to 5 and et cetera, unless you're under exclusive. But here's what Bleeding Cool said. And they really got to watch what they say, because this is a potentially libelous statement, in my opinion, because this could prevent Art from getting work in the mainstream again. This could, throw major shade at DC Comics now, and this could open up a whole can of worms. Bleeding Cool is usually pretty good at opening up cans of worms, but this is not what I expected from this site, to be honest. I mean, they've dumped rumors before, but man, I don't know. So at this point, this is coming from Rich Johnston. At this point, I've obviously been talking to other people about these allegations. Yeah. Make sure you check your sources there. And while Marvel Comics aren't willing to offer any comment, okay, so it wasn't Marvel. I've been led to understand that Marvel had made investigations and had proof that Thibert not only had been poaching talent from Marvel to DC, but had been paid by DC Comics for doing so, and that they showed this proof to Thibert. Obviously, Thibert is contradicting that in his testimony when I asked him about it. He told me DC Comics never paid me to woo people from Marvel. They would never do such a thing. I would never accept an offer. I never tried to woo anyone from a company. And this is the thing. Now, he did a follow-up video because I guess... see, this is Art Thibert. He looks just like Brad Pitt. He does. Why he wants to do comic books instead of movies, completely beyond me. Anyway, he did a video following up on, I guess, Zach, your boy Zach, had done a video saying that Art was actually in the wrong by going out to eat with DC Comics people while working at Marvel. But I'm like, that's not... I listened to part of it and I'm like, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. And this isn't to throw shade. Look, I'm not throwing shade at anybody. But unless you've actually worked as a freelancer, you're basically a contractor. You are your own boss and you're providing services to different publishers, different companies. So, I mean, this is what I had to say on it yesterday. If anybody even cares about my opinion, I don't know how many people do, but this is my opinion. Most comic book creators are freelance unless you work a staff job like an editor or whatever. You don't punch a clock at the old comic book factory. You're a self-employed contractor. You're hired by the gig. Switching between publishers is 100% normal. Unless exclusive, you're a mercenary. So to hear that someone was blacklisted for having lunch with the competition when Marvel and DC traded people all the time is dumb. To hear accusations that DC Comics was paying Marvel people to poach is dumber, since comics is small and everybody knows everybody anyway. Again, if you've never been a full-time freelancer, it's a different world than being a 9-to-5er. You work for yourself and publishers retain your services. You often juggle multiple clients to keep the cash flowing. This is true today. even, comics in its diminished state, it's not unusual to find people maybe working for, even if they're, not working for Marvel and DC, because they tend to do more exclusive deals now, right? But to find people maybe working for IDW and Boom, at the same time. I've worked for 2 or 3 publishers at the same time. I've had, I was doing Disney work for IDW and Fantagraphics at the same time, and it's very normal. It's very normal. I mean, comic book creators, frankly, you're kind of like a plumber or a roofer. I mean, it doesn't sound very glamorous because it's not very glamorous. You're constantly hustling for that next job. It's a very, very hard life. If you've never done it, you don't understand, really how it works. And it is a very unusual way to make a living, right? So to have, someone come out and say that, well, they were poaching talent because they took meetings with other editors or whatever. That is 100% normal. I know people who worked back at Marvel and DC during that time frame, and it was very normal for those people to fraternize. Everybody knew everybody, especially if you were living in New York. You just hop across town and you go work for the other publisher. If they wanted you bad enough, they'd offer you an exclusive, and the exclusive thing seems to be more of a recent deal. Now, there is some, I guess some honor among thieves or whatever that, if you're getting the majority of your work from one place, you're probably not going to feel the need to have to go someplace else. But again, you're a contractor. You're working month to month. You don't know where your next paycheck's coming from, and you're always going to be out there looking for work unless somebody is going to give you something a little more permanent. And that's why CrossGen, I don't know how many of you remember CrossGen, but they were a short-lived comic book publisher back in the 90s that promised stability. They promised regular salary, health insurance, whatever. The catch was you had to move to Florida. And you know what? A lot of these Marvel and DC people moved to Florida, and then the company folded and they got stuck in Florida. But I digress. So personally, I do not believe that Art Thibert did anything out of the ordinary. If he did, then a bunch of other comic book creators did as well. It sounds like there were some other issues going on at Marvel at the time that they just used that as a reason to get rid of him. This happens a lot with people who get fired for whatever reason from a job. A lot of times the actual reason you're getting fired is not the reason that they give you. It could just be that people absolutely hate you, but they can't fire you because people absolutely hate you. So they find another reason. They start case building. Hey, you came in 10 minutes late, twice this month or whatever. And because you keep coming in late, we're going to get rid of you. When in fact, they just absolutely hated working with you and they just had to find a reason, right? And this is probably what happened here. It sounds like this particular editor or whatever, Dave Bogart, it sounds like he was pissed off that Art was not towing the line. They wanted to, implement some cost cutting measures. Art wouldn't play ball, so they found a reason to get rid of him. That's the story as I seem to understand it. And again, I'm going to link to Art's video. Now, what was weird about this though, and look, I think Bleeding Cool's been very much on the up and up that they don't like Comicsgate, that they're not fans of the Comicsgate thing. But the purpose of this article seemed to be more about making sure everybody knew Art Thibert was Comicsgate, or he identified as Comicsgate, or he was talking to Comicsgaters. That was to dig up a bunch of stuff. And it's very weird that, all the names are in bold as call outs, a lot of name dropping, a lot of weirdness. This is a very weird article. Why his video warranted a 29 paragraph, novella is beyond me. But when you get to the bottom of it, this is really what I think this article was about. And, people are free to disagree. But, they talk about how it may be worth pointing out that at the point G.I. Joe writer Aubrey Sitterson was targeted by Comicsgate, Richard Meyer, that would be your boy Zach, demanding he be fired. Did he? Did Richard Meyer demand? I don't know. I didn't really follow the Aubrey Sitterson situation. Now, here, I'll tell you my armchair opinion on Aubrey Sitterson. I think what he said was incredibly stupid. I think it was incredibly stupid what he said as being on the payroll for IDW. That being said, I guess my thing is like if the dude apologized and that was that, then I don't see why he would have to be terminated. If it were me, I'd be like, just apologize if people misunderstood what you're saying, and we just move forward, and that's that. But apparently, Bleeding Cool is saying that Comicsgate's Richard Meyer demanded that Aubrey Sitterson be fired. Again, I can't comment on that. I know there was a big brouhaha about Aubrey Sitterson. I wasn't really paying attention, but he demanded he was fired because he was a socialist. And as a New Yorker, he took umbrage at what some people saw as people's fake outrage over 9/11, which was the comment, came out very badly. Sitterson was fired by IDW by Hasbro as a result. I'm going to be honest, I don't think one YouTuber had that kind of sway. As I recall, again, armchair observer, and I'm not into G.I. Joe as much as I am Transformers, but I'm a huge Hasbro toy fan. I love Transformers. I know Hasbro, as I understand it from people who were talking to me about what was going on, there was a lot of trolling on message boards, and the customers revolted, and it had very little to do with what was going on YouTube. A lot of people didn't even know what was going on YouTube. They're just like, they saw these articles being written about this, and they're like, oh my God, it's G.I. Joe. A lot of these people were military. They were offended. They're patriotic. They were offended. They wrote Hasbro. That is my understanding. That is my understanding. Again, armchair observer, not involved at all in this. But, for comic book people to say stupid stuff on Twitter, it's just another Tuesday. That is like literally everybody. So other creators similarly targeted by Comicsgate people who lost their jobs include Chelsea Cain and Chuck Wendig. Chelsea Cain, I don't know what happened. I'll be honest. I have no idea what happened to her. I remember reading about that, and she was terminated from Marvel for, I don't know why. I don't think it had anything to do with Comicsgate, though. I think it was she was late on her book or something. And Chuck Wendig was saying really stupid stuff. But it wasn't just like a one-off like Aubrey Sitterson. It was Chuck Wendig was saying a lot of potentially brand-damaging things every day. Day in, day out, day in, day out. And he's free to do that. But the companies who employ him on a freelance basis are also free to make a decision as to whether or not they want that person to represent their brand. Plenty have tried to get me fired from Bleeding Cool. Well, I'm sure they probably have. But what does this have to do? What does this have to do with Art Thibert? You see what I'm saying? Like this whole thing is basically Art Thibert was blacklisted. Well, this whole blacklisting thing took place before Art Thibert threw in with Comicsgate. All of this took place decade plus before. So this has literally nothing to do with Comicsgate that I'm aware of, but we have to tie it to Comicsgate somehow. So the purpose of this, I think, is Art Thibert, notable comic book veteran, worked on some of the best-selling Marvel comics of all time, right? We have to tie his name to Comicsgate and have it so when you Google Art Thibert, this is what comes up. Just so you know, Art Thibert is a Comicsgater, and Richard Meyer called for Aubrey Sitterson to be fired and Chelsea Cain and Chuck Wendig because YouTuber Richard Meyer has that much power. Even though a lot of these companies absolutely hate this guy, he's got that much power to get all of these people fired. I think maybe they're giving YouTube a little more credit than actually, I mean, just because you're concerned about what YouTube and Comicsgate are doing day in, day out doesn't mean that the rest of the world really is. So that's actually giving YouTubers much more power than they probably have. But I digress. So then he goes back to, hey, here's the story. You can listen to it. So very interesting development. So my takeaway here, again, we've had Art on. He seems like a pretty solid guy. I know people who know him, who have vouched for him. And he seems like he's a pretty decent dude. That's just my surface level thing. What he's accused of, again, I don't think that's the reason he was actually terminated. I think he probably just wouldn't play ball with some editorial brain fart, and that's why he got gone. It happens all the time. The reason they gave is not the actual reason he was terminated. That being said, I am concerned that people are going around and look, that's up to Marvel, whatever, Marvel and DC, but now we basically got, his name being tied into some sort of scandal that can't be proven. And if that's the case, I'm like, well, DC Comics then, did DC Comics poach Marvel people regularly? Is this what happened? Because I don't know. You know, I would love to be working on a Spider-Man book and have somebody be like, here, have $2 million. Come on over. Come on over to DC and work on Batman for a while. I'd love to be in that position. I'm sure they do throw money at people. What happened with Brian Michael Bendis? You know, I'm sure they threw buckets of money at him. But I mean, as far as, you know, these creators taking lunches with editors from different companies, it's happening all the time. As I understand it, Marvel and DC editors used to have lunch all the time. So I don't understand what the big deal is, I guess is what I'm saying. At the end of it, I don't understand what the big deal is. And we had a lot of people asking for opinions on Twitter and whatnot because we had Art on. I just think it's another Tuesday. I think it's being blown out of proportion. And I think that there's probably some kind of motivation behind writing this particular article, given the fact that Bleeding Cool does not like Comicsgate, wanting to make sure everybody knows that Art Thibert is on the naughty list. That would be my takeaway from it. But I don't know. I'd have to see it. I'd have to see some proof that he actually did this, because I just don't even understand where it makes sense, given the way things were back then. So I'm going to wrap this up. If you want to see our interview with Art Thibert, this is before any of the drama. I will give you a link. You can go out and do that. You can also check out his Indiegogo. Oh, that was the other thing. That was the other thing he was accused of. That's right. That's right. So he was accused of milking this drama to boost his Indiegogo, you know, which, look, hey, people are going to mention they've got crowdfunding campaigns. You know, they are. Everybody does. You know, they mention, geez, I've seen people put their crowdfunding campaign in their Twitter handle. I've seen them put it, you know, on the signatures of their emails. I mean, you're going to do it. But I think people are probably asking him, well, Art, why are you crowdfunding? Why don't you just go back to work for Marvel or DC? And this was his answer. So at this point, though, given the way those companies are, I don't think I would want to work for either one of them, especially since I think they're both living on borrowed time. I think it's a matter of time until either Disney or Warner, you know, pulls a plug. That's my opinion. I think that's going to happen sooner rather than later. And I'm thinking at this point, Warner Media is probably going to blink first, because they're really cutting back, really cutting corners, and they're closing down divisions I didn't think that they would bother closing down. And they flat out said nothing's sacred. So, you know, maybe DC Comics, as we know it, won't be around in 2 or 3 years anyway. So jump ship, do your own thing. I'm going to put a link. Talk to you guys later. Goodbye. Hey guys, thanks for watching Clownfish TV. Please consider supporting the channel. Go to clownfishsupport.com. That's clownfishsupport.com. And if you want to join our community, go to clownfishtalk.com. That's clownfishtalk.com. Please subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. We will talk to you next time.